Good evening. The Salton Sea is changing. This once beautiful oasis has slowly turned toxic, forcing many families out of the area. But there are restoration efforts underway to help the state's largest body of water. So in part one of this series, we showcased the importance of the sea's emerging wetlands. We spoke to air quality experts about the impact of toxic chemicals and pesticides. We analyzed water use near the sea with the introduction of lithium, and we highlighted the state's 10-year restoration plan. But there are still so many stories to be told, and that's what we're sharing tonight. We'll hear from seismologists as new studies show the Salton Sea impacts earthquake activity all across the region. We'll speak to advocates pushing to preserve natural areas along the sea, taking their efforts all the way to the president. We'll explore some of the cities and attractions that have formed around its shore, and we take a trip to the sea's northwestern edge, to desert shores. And that's where we'll begin tonight, with a community-led effort to bring water and life back to a once bustling beach town that's disappeared over time. And there's a new discovery in April that's sparked excitement about their progress.
Thousands of Californians and persons from all over the country already own property here, and homes are beginning to dot the land. Wide and airy, with a distinctive kind of style designed for maximum enjoyment and a wonderful kind of life.
That was the promise to future Salton Sea homeowners in the 1960s, including those who moved to Desert Shores, a waterfront community complete with a yacht club, fishing barge, and a collection of shoreline channels, also called the Keys.
Well, we call that the good old days. People fishing everywhere, swimming, boats, and it was called the Western Riviera for a good reason.
The Keys formed when the Colorado River flooded the sea, spilling into the channels. And lakeside properties were built right along the waterways, a serene environment for locals and wildlife alike.
Oh, it was beautiful. I mean, I would come down here and sit at the end of Acapulco, which is one of the channels down here, and just watch. It's so peaceful. And we had the pelicans here. We had all the different birds, the ducks.
But as the Salton Sea shrinks, water no longer reaches the Keys, turning the once lively area into this, a series of dried-up channels and dust. And pesticides from local farms have impacted any water that's left behind, turning some a strange color or creating strong odors. Unfortunately, a lot of buildings in the area are now left abandoned, and docks like this one that used to float above the channel are now stuck on the dry embankment, just a reminder of what used to be over the years.
Water came up in the center. My husband's boat recorded it at 21 feet in the center for depth. My kids, grandkids, fished off of the wall here, and we caught fish all the time.
But soon those memories could be a reality.
Soils naturally compressed.
A community-driven effort is underway to restore the area to its former glory. A group of concerned homeowners has brought the health and environmental issue to lawmakers across the state.
We finally got enough voices in Sacramento to hear us, and it got put in as a possible project. We finally got a project manager, and now it's coming down to the nuts and bolts of all the real intricacies of actually filling the channel.
Funding for the project has been hard to secure, but a recent $1 million grant from the Bureau of Reclamation is enough to get started. Another problem? Finding clean water to flood the Keys. But at the end of April, the team discovered a groundwater well under one of the channels, which is sparking excitement.
The well might actually reduce the cost associated with drilling for water. An existing well, even if it was built in 1959, offers the opportunity to use that existing well to actually use that for the filling the channels.
After years of research and discussions, the well water could be the key to flooding the channels again, covering exposed toxic shoreline, raising property value, and allowing the area to welcome back both visitors and wildlife.
Would increase, hopefully, some enterprise in the area, bring some restaurants and businesses in the area.
A berm would also be created to keep the clean water separate from the toxic Salton Sea. And while more testing on the well and channels is underway, local homeowners are ready to see this restoration project completed.
It's kind of stupid, but I made a promise to the birds and the fish that I would do everything in my power to restore it back.
It'd mean everything. We'd get our birds back.
We actually have traction, we have boots on the ground, and we're not going to let this go.
The development team for this project aims to have their final report back by the end of May to determine if the well will be a viable source of water that can finally turn this community around. And there's another important effort that's happening on the north edge of the sea, a movement to protect a stretch of land that's growing in importance as the Salton Sea becomes more toxic. And this effort has reached the president. After the break, we'll speak to the team involved. Welcome back. There are thousands of acres of open desert just west of the Coachella Valley near the north edge of the Salton Sea. And there's a growing campaign to preserve this space, especially as the sea continues to face a variety of challenges. Recently, local lawmakers brought this issue to the Capitol in a full-scale push to protect the Chuckwalla National Monument.
Tribal Chairman Thomas Torres hikes through the canyons of the Mecca Hills wilderness his ancestors called home.
It's significantly sacred because this is a part of our creation story where two gods were fighting here, and one of our gods, got exiled and was exiled here. So this area was an area of refuge, of sanctity, of safety.
The chairman of the Torres Martinez Desert Cahuilla Indians is part of a growing effort to protect this stretch of desert. He's one of the voices calling for President Biden to designate the area as the Chuckwalla National Monument.
As we say in Cahuilla, toyamanish, which means always. We have always been here to protect this land and be one with the environment. We've always lived with the plants and the animals as one. This here must truly be protected because this is a beginning of our spirituality, the customs and traditions of the Cahuilla people.
Several rare or endangered plant and animal species also call the region home, and they play an important role in the balance of the desert ecosystem. Local advocates say preserving this space will also protect them.
There's so many species that rely on these areas for their survival. You see canyon wrens, you probably spot a small bird that is called verdin, eagles, you see roadrunners.
The natural maze of narrow passes was formed by the restless San Andreas Fault and streams.
And this proposed monument would protect 630,000 acres, including the beautiful and iconic Painted Canyon.
This is the Painted Canyon. You can see different rock formations. As you see on the walls, you see that, as geologists claim, most of these rocks, were underwater at one point.
A proposed boundary for the monument runs from the Coachella Valley to the Colorado River and also includes plans to expand Joshua Tree National Park by about 18,000 acres. And the protections would also introduce methods for tribes to steward their homelands as partners with federal agencies. Ruiz says preserving this natural habitat is also becoming more important as the Salton Sea continues to shrink and become more toxic. The monument would offer an improved access to nature for both locals and wildlife.
Human beings are also part of this larger ecosystem, and we need to make sure, that people are also protected. By establishing the national monument, it will allow local communities to participate for an economic boost. It will allow the local communities to also be able to have easy access to the outdoors.
Over the past few months, some renewable energy developers have shared concerns about site conflicts. However, revised maps and proposals have quelled those concerns. And in April,
so this initiative has been years in the making.
A handful of solar groups joined local lawmakers, including Representative Raul Ruiz, as they introduced a bill to officially establish the monument, leaving the decision now up to the president.
Along with the support from the 13 tribes in this region, we're asking President Biden, please designate the Chuckwalla National Monument for future generations.
So we mentioned the Mecca Hills that we toured, formed by the well-known San Andreas Fault, which winds all through the Coachella Valley, carving this unique landscape. And researchers say this fault line and earthquake activity is all impacted by the Salton Sea. How exactly? That's after the break. When you think of tourist attractions in the Coachella Valley, the San Andreas Fault may not be at the top of your list. But Jeep tours and hikes will take you right along the canyons created by the state's biggest fault line. It's an impressive sight, but certainly not the place you want to be during an earthquake. Over the years, scientists have studied the fault system here in the Coachella Valley, and new studies show there's a connection between major quakes and the Salton Sea.
So we're standing on what's called the Banning Strand of the San Andreas Fault. It's this strand that heads kind of through San Gorgonio Pass and connects really the Salton Sea with really the LA basin. It's this strip through here.
From an open field in Desert Hot Springs, Dr. Kate Scharrer traces the path of the notorious San Andreas Fault, a fracture in the Earth's crust where two tectonic plates touch, at times producing large earthquakes.
The San Andreas Fault is a great fault because it's really one of the faster moving ones we have in North America. It's really made some of the quintessential features of Southern California that you can see behind us. The landscape is really affected by the movement on this fault system, so it's integral to the terrain that we all love.
The San Andreas Fault system runs through the state, along the Coachella Valley, and onto the east side of the Salton Sea. It also includes the San Jacinto and Imperial fault zones, which border the sea's western and southern shores, creating a lot of seismic activity. At times, this network of faults surrounding the sea has produced over 1,000 small quakes in just a few days.
The south end of the Salton Sea is really interesting. There's a lot of geothermal activity there. We have basically a thin crust where you're sort of extending the crust there, and a lot of faults that accommodate that. So you have quite often these smaller earthquake swarms. They're scientifically interesting because they don't operate quite the same as the big ones that you hear about happening worldwide, and someday will happen here.
So when will we feel the next big one? The USGS has several seismometers stationed around the sea to detect and measure activity. Their data shows the San Andreas Fault has had a major rupture about every 180 years. And geophysicists at San Diego State University say a large earthquake is long overdue.
It's been about 300 years since the last large event in the paleoseismic record. So we're about 120 years past the sort of average time that it would take for a major rupture on the southern part of the San Andreas Fault.
Dr. Matthew Weingarten's team has been researching possible reasons for the delay. And their findings show the Salton Sea is playing an important role. As it shrinks, it's putting less stress on nearby fault lines, potentially delaying the next big one. The sea's volume is currently 40 times smaller than its predecessor, the ancient Lake Cahuilla, which once covered the region. The ancient lake filled 6 times over a 1,000-year period, and Dr. Weingarten's team found large earthquakes on the San Andreas Fault primarily took place when the lake was full, and there was a break in shaking during the times in between when water levels were low.
And so the thought was this is not just correlation, but maybe there's some causation or some physical mechanism linking the two. And we showed that the stress changes from the lake were large enough to trigger events on the southern San Andreas Fault.
According to the team, the smaller water mass of today's Salton Sea has a large impact. It's not only easing pressure, it's stabilizing this portion of the southern San Andreas Fault. But while it may sound like a nice break for homeowners, it's not permanent and comes with a warning from scientists, as built-up stress from over the years could eventually be released in a major quake.
This has typically been described by other folks throughout the earthquake community that the southern San Andreas Fault is 10 months pregnant or locked and loaded for failure.
However, that's not guaranteed. The stress could also be released through a series of smaller earthquakes, which Weingarten's team considers best-case scenario. And while the Salton Sea has played a role in the area's seismology, experts say it's just a part of the equation of this ever-changing landscape.
The plates are always moving, so we're always accumulating this strain that needs to be released in large earthquakes. And so even though we don't currently have this lake signature like we did in prehistoric times, we still are accumulating the energy for a big earthquake. So we're basically a new terrain now that we're in the Anthropocene.
Well, just as the faults and the beautiful Mecca Hills wilderness have attracted visitors to the Coachella Valley, so are some of the cities around the Salton Sea and one micronation. After the break, we're going to have a bit of fun and take a tour of some of the most iconic stops. Welcome back. For our final story tonight, we're looking at the attractions around the Salton Sea and how they came to be. Aside from some of the major cities, these areas have their own subculture and they draw visitors in daily. The most well-known, Slab City and Bombay Beach.
This is going to be an exciting weekend for me. I am going out to Slab City.
I'm about to roll up to Slab City alone. Slab City. That's been on my radar for years.
Slab City, known as the last free place. It's an unincorporated community on the southeastern side of the Salton Sea, an area with no electricity, no running water, and minimal government involvement.
Everyone's just kind of doing their own thing, and a lot of people are worried about like the whole lawless town, that they're going to get like robbed or something, but I think it's just people doing their thing and just not being, I don't know, like a slave to the government or the system.
Before it was Slab City, it was a World War II training ground called Camp Dunlap, and leftover large concrete slabs and bunkers gave the area its current name. After the camp was dismantled, a few Marine veterans who worked at the base set up camp, followed by others who want to stay off the grid, snowbirds, and artists, including Leonard Knight, creator of the Salvation Mountain art installation, which stands at 50 feet tall.
It's kind of cool to see how big he got it.
The colorful paint over concrete and hay bales took Leonard almost 30 years to create. Another popular attraction? Bombay Beach. It's a waterfront community that's opening doors for local artists. It's a town where the bus is almost never on time, but there's always an open bar and good drinks over at the Ski Inn. It's a town filled with display after display of public art.
Each of the displays, I mean, obviously they all have their own meaning. It's not like an art museum where you're going to go in and it's going to have like the artist's purpose behind it. And so it's actually really cool just because it's your own interpretation once you look at it.
Bombay Beach is the lowest community in the United States at 223 feet below sea level, and several homes dot the shoreline in a small grid. Back in the 1950s, it was a popular destination and stayed that way until the sea turned toxic and the odor and health concerns scared many away. However, in the past few years, it's made a small comeback, attracting photographers, filmmakers, and artists.
Had to take a picture of the swing, of course, the iconic swing, in part just because some of the friends that I told that I was going to stop by here, that's of course one of the things they were aware of.
In Bombay Beach, there's one restaurant. The closest gas station is 20 miles away, and there's a one-man volunteer fire department. But still, it's a place many visitors are drawn to.
Wasn't sure what we were kind of getting ourselves into coming out here. Came in completely blind. Definitely not what I was expecting, but yeah, super cool, super unique.
And of course, we can't leave tonight without talking about the area's only micronation. It was created by San Diego's slow jam DJ Randy Williams, who purchased this empty desert lot in 2021, turning the open space into an entire world of its own. Welcome to Slow Jamistan.
Ladies and gentlemen, I now pronounce you Slow Jamastani!
A celebration in the United Territories of the sovereign nation of the People's Republic of Slow Jamistan, or simply Slow Jamistan for short. As a group of citizens is welcomed to one of the newest attractions near the Salton Sea, just off Highway 78.
Well, it all started with a movement against the shoes they call Crocs. Very disturbed by that. We contacted our local and national police and government and authorities to try to stop the spread of Crocs across America. The request landed on deaf ears, blind eyes. We could have done two things, a violent uprising, but I'm a peaceful guy, so instead we created our very own country where crocs are strictly prohibited.
That's His Excellency Supreme Sultan Randy R. Dub Williams, the leader of Imperial County's only micronation. And what his country lacks in terms of legal recognition, it makes up for with its own currency, changing accent, and completely original national anthem.
Inside our nation, you were never alone. Oh, no, oh, no. It's this Sultana's time. Sultana's time is where I'm from. This is my home.
Permission on that anthem still pending. And while crocs are a big no, the area has some other strict laws which are taken very seriously, including no biting into string cheese.
Which, of course, string cheese was meant to be, have the strings lovingly pulled.
No replying all to emails.
I hate this. Why do people do it? In Sloyamastan, you get caught doing that. Our IT department goes into your computer, replaces all of your fonts with Comic Sans for 30 days.
No mumble rap.
The punishment is very strict. 500-word essay on what 90s hip-hop means to you.
And no speeding, with one exception.
If you are bringing home tacos from the takeout and you get pulled over speeding, if you have tacos next to you, we give you a pass, because what is fun about cold tacos?
If those rules are broken, you'll have to deal with the area's chief border agent.
Our budget is very, very tiny. Therefore, I have to do a lot of bicycling, jumping, pogo sticking, crying, running, you name it. I have to do all of that. It's a very, very hard job.
But don't worry, that water gun in his holster only shoots tequila. At about 18,000 citizens and counting, Slowjamistan has a larger population than a handful of nations. However, none actually live on site, and many just visit virtually. But as it grows, the leaders want to make a splash and have proposed renaming the nearby Salton Sea to the Salton Sea.
We might have to take things into our own hands. If you suddenly go down there and it no longer says Salton Sea, and now says Salton Sea, you know, I'm not saying who, but it could have been us.
But most importantly, the Sultan says it's a place for all.
Escape from everything, all the bickering and the fighting. We have no labels in Sloyamastan. Just don't bring crocs.
Sloyamastan. Sloyamastan.
Again, the space isn't legally recognized as a country, and the name Salton Sea isn't going anywhere. But that's not stopping the Sultan and visitors from bringing just a bit of fun to an area that's dealing with a unique set of challenges. We'll be right back. Before we go tonight, a quick reminder of some of the key projects that we're keeping an eye on as restoration efforts continue around the Salton Sea. We're expecting updates on these 3 key efforts very soon, and we'll share the latest with you right here on NBC Palm Springs. Good night.